Every day we are seeing a new open source large language model, which claims to be bigger and better. What exactly does a parameter mean in an LLM context?
Most of them are variations of existing models that have been fine-tuned.
Does that really translate to the hyperparameters that we are used to in typical neural network architecture? In this confusing landscape, continuous growing spectrum of LLMs, what is the thumb rule to choose an LLM for a typical enterprise?
Natural trade-offs between model size, latency, and cost, and different tasks.
There is a variation of 7 billion parameters versus 30 billion and 100 billion. What exactly does that signify?
Don't understand these things as well as we.
So, Eran, is it safe to say the larger the size, the higher the number of billion parameters? Is that directly proportional? Technically, how does this impact an enterprise that is? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Encounter, where we talk to the senior leaders from the tech industry to get their unique perspectives and insights. Today, we have a special guest joining us. Please welcome Eran Yahav, CTO of Tabnine. Hi, Eran. It's great to have you on the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Eran, I've been using Tabnine for a while, particularly with my VS Code, and I love the functionality. So, today's talk or the discussion is going to be around the technical aspects of how LLMs are enabling and empowering developers. So, there is one question that I constantly keep getting from my audiences whenever I present or whenever I speak to developers. So the first thing is, every day we are seeing a new open source large language model, which claims to be bigger and better. And particularly the benchmark there seems to be the billion number of parameters. So what exactly does a parameter mean in an LLM context? And does that really translate to the hyperparameters that we are used to in typical neural network architecture?
So no, the parameters are basically, roughly the computational power of the model. And I think the game is no longer increasing the model size per se. So we've been seeing tremendous value being generated simply by increasing model size in the past, 3-4 years. And it's been almost like Moore's law, but on steroids, when every 3 months or something, we see a huge jump in the number of parameters. And I think we started to see diminishing returns on purely on model size, and also some thinking around different tasks requiring different size of model based on the difficulty. So you asked a bunch of different questions. Let me try to kind of answer them in some orderly fashion. So first off, as I said, in terms of pure size of the model, we're started to see diminishing returns. So I don't expect model sizes to keep increasing as they have been so far. Second question is about new models popping up every day. That's definitely true. Most of them are variations of existing models that have been fine-tuned for one task or another, for instruct or for a different purpose. Doesn't even matter. And because the benchmarking these days is relatively weak compared to the power of the models, we are seeing these I don't know if they're outrageous, but they're like very strong claims on power of models that don't always translate to actual value in the field, right? So I hope that answered most of your question, but
Right. So when an OSS LLM claims that there is a variation of 7 billion parameters versus 30 billion and 100 billion, what exactly does that signify?
So I think really At least the thinking right now, there's, again, we don't understand these things as well as we should have or wanted to. But the current thinking is that the model is as powerful as the amount of data that it has been trained on, and larger models kind of can consume or can compress or present a larger amount of data with high fidelity or with high generalization abilities. And I think we are seeing, that there have been this work on kind of emergent properties of language models that have since been debunked or at least disputed. But that claims something that I think is fundamentally correct, that at a certain size of model, you start to see emergent behaviors that you don't see at smaller sizes. And depending on the task, that exact boundary in which you see these emergent behaviors or the kind of strong generalization of the model um, starts to occur. So I know for code generation, maybe this happens, at 12 billion. For other tasks, it may happen at 20 billion. At other tasks, it may require 80 billion. But, generally there's kind of some general agreement that there is an emergent behavior that happens once you cross a certain size threshold. Again, not all tasks are born equal, right? So for some tasks, this can happen at relatively small models of single-digit billions that give you very good behavior or very good results.
So, Eran, is it safe to say the larger the size, the higher the number of billion parameters? Is that directly proportional?
Yeah, the size is measured in the number of billions of
The
of,
data
of,
set,
of
the
panels.
size of
Yeah.
the data set, basically.
The size of data, no, size data set is measured differently, but a larger model does require a larger data set to kind of feed into it, to kind of to train it, to move the parameters, to converge. It requires more data. So, like, there are these scaling laws that tell you, like, if you want to train a model of size 20 billion, this is the number of, trillion of tokens that you need to show the model.
So, technically, how does this impact an enterprise that is considering using an LLM in one of the few deployment models? One is they consume it as a service like OpenAI, GPT-4, or Cohere, or Anthropic, or they can choose something like Falcon, run it in their on-prem environment or in the public cloud. So, in this confusing landscape and a continuous growing spectrum of LLMs, what do you suggest enterprises to basically go for? What is the thumb rule to choose an LLM for a typical enterprise?
So I think there are different natural trade-offs between model size, latency, and cost, and different tasks may require different model sizes or different latency requirement and also different cost requirement, right? And um, other considerations are, as you mentioned, the level of isolation required. Maybe my enterprise is not willing to send data outside the VPC, or maybe my enterprise is even air gapped for most of the kind of interactions, and you want something that runs completely locally with full isolation. So there's definitely like these non-functional constraints on the problem. I find it hard to believe that uh, an enterprise will have a single LLM inside it, maybe further down the road, but right now there are so many different solutions, again with different trade-offs on latency and cost, and also task specificity. So you may have an optimal model to kind of write marketing materials and another model optimized for generating code or for having chat around your code base or things like that. Even for Tabnine, we're using a bunch of different models that have exactly these different trade-offs in terms of latency, size, and cost, because the kind of behavior that you'd like to get in code completion, which is almost instantaneous, like in a very short bracket of a few hundreds of milliseconds, is very different from the latency requirements of Tabnine chat that is like a conversational interface in which you're willing to wait a little longer, right? And this allows us to kind of use a combination of different models with these different trade-offs. And I expect other products to go in the same way, to kind of use a combination of different models with different trade-offs to satisfy different product features. Right? So,
That's interesting. So, are you saying there is going to be an instruct-based LLM and one for summarization, and one is fine-tuned for a specific, lexical terminology? So, when an enterprise has access to these specialized LLMs, how do they orchestrate? Is that where things like LangChain and LLM, I mean, the Llama index come in? Is that the use case for LangChain?
this is one maybe of the use cases for LangChain, although I expect, not only as you do with LangChain, not only to coordinate calls between different LLMs, but also between other systems and systems of record, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's definitely going to be room for something like AI 21 Studio, if you're familiar with that, or Google Model
Right.
Garden, which is something that allows you to start maybe with a small family of models with different sizes, different trade-offs, and then fine tune them to different tasks and get something that is within the same studio but has very different trade-offs or combinations or specializations of models across the ecosystem. And again, in Tabnine, we also think about it the same way of having like some studio that allows you to specialize different models in your organization for different departments or different code bases or different needs, because it's not likely that a single model will be kind of the solution for all of these different specialized verticals, let's call.
Got it. Got it. So just like we deal with multiple databases, we are going to have multiple LLMs that we are going to consume.
I think
Interesting.
so. I think so, and I think just like we don't have a single database provider, for some things you use Mongo, for some things you use Postgres, for some things you use something else. I think it's also unlikely that we'll converge on a single provider that will be a single model to rule them all. Of course, there are going to be some big players. Maybe Google is going to have like a single vertex or something, and they will try to use that as a big hammer to solve all problems, right? But I think in reality, there's going to be some diversity of providers, model sizes, and products that use these. Your your
Absolutely.
your analogy of databases is, I think, quite appropriate. Yeah.
Right. At least for relational databases, we have standards like JDBC and ODBC for connection. So I hope LangChain or Llama Index will raise up to that and become the JDBC or ODBC for at least certain LLMs.
Yeah, I think it's more complicated than that. It's a little more subtle because in JDBC, everything is deterministic, right? You insert something to the database, you select, and you get the same results. When you deal with these kind of models, if you switch model A with model B, the behavior of the actual product may change quite substantially, right? So it's a little more subtle than just having a uniform API, but the kind of the analogy I think transfers well. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. So now switching gears and asking some of the obvious questions, Eran. So with AI assisted code, and almost every ID now has some kind of an AI assisted code completion. So what is the future of programmers and developers? Is it becoming redundant and obsolete?
Yeah, it's a very common question, and my answer is that first we have to revisit what does it mean to be a software engineer. And a software engineer, the job description has never been generate code. The job description is solve business problems using software. And
Correct.
that job description holds even if some other machinery generates the code for you, right? And what we're seeing is the natural thing that people have been talking about for since at least I started programming, which is trying to raise the level of abstraction which you have to kind of solve the tasks. So, in the olden days, we wrote assembly code and then came compilers. And I think what we're seeing these days is the natural extension of compilers to the next level of the machine, helping you deal with the complexity of the machine, right? What a compiler does is using the machine to help you deal with the complexity of the machine by using a higher level language that is translated to assembly or to machine code at the end. And what we're seeing now is the next phase in which you have AI that helps you translate higher level abstraction, maybe natural language, maybe combination of pseudocode and natural language, maybe conversation as the central kind of interaction model to actual code that runs. It doesn't mean that in the short term code will cease to exist, because for certain things it's just easier to do them in code rather than explaining them in a very lengthy conversation, especially when you're dealing with maintenance and not just writing things from scratch. So a lot of the demos or the POCs that we're seeing are starting application from scratch. And this is like a self-driving car in a universe where only AI is driving, but we actually live in legacy world, or in a world where a lot of software already exists that needs to be maintained, and even new software that is created needs to be maintained as code and cannot be maintained still using conversational interface or something like that. So maybe my higher level point is that yes, some of the code is going to be created with AI. I think most of the code is going to be created with assistance of AI, and this is already happening. With Tabnine and others being used quite widely. Most of the code that is being written, I guess, in the next 5 years is going to be touched by AI in one way or another. But the artifact being generated is still going to be code. As we move further down, in, let's say 2 years from now, I think we're moving into a world of AI-driven program development, software development. This is a world where the AI drives the process, the entire SDLC, the entire software development lifecycle. So maybe you start with a high-level description of a task. The AI does the elaboration to concrete work items, gives you references to your code of where you should look in order to kind of implement it, and suggests an implementation for you and says like, hey, Johnny, this is like how I would do it. You may or may not take it, but here's my suggestion. And maybe you have a conversation around that with AI until you converge, and then you just accept a PR is created, the code is generated. Maybe all of this happens with you never entering your IDE per se, right? And I think we'll see more and more of that happening, especially in verticals where this is easy, maybe more the UI code, or maybe all these things that are easier to kind of make a very snap judgment of whether what the AI gave you actually works or not, right? If you're generating some clever algorithm, it may be very hard for you to consume the result from the AI with high confidence. But if it's something that you can look at and say, hey, Tabnine, the UI that you generated, the buttons are overlapping, this is not good, right? Then it's very easy kind of conversationally to fix that and kind of make a snap judgment of whether you want to take this code or not, right? The code is kind of, maybe the point is that I don't need to look at the code itself even to understand that what I got is what I wanted or not, right? I can look at the kind of exhibited behavior of the code.
Right. So that actually leads to the next question, which is how trustworthy is this code generated by AI? Now, are we going to see things like IP-related lawsuits claiming that their code is allegedly used for training the models?
I think we're already seeing lawsuits. So the legal aspect of all of this is not clear, and there's, I think, a lot that will have to fundamentally change in how the legal system looks at these questions, because it's a brave new world, right? And you kind of apply the same rules, but the game has changed. And I'm kind of, at least for code, I'm in the camp that said open source contributors, when they contributed, had some intent in mind. So when I created my project with GPL, I never intended to contribute it to someone who whitewashes it and kind of generates something else from it. I gave it to the community such that, the contribution is paid forward, right? That new projects that are being created are released under the same license. So to me, it is not really a legal question. It's more of kind of, I don't want to use the moral, this is a very high kind of word, but I said I want to respect the intent of the developer who contributed this code to the open source community. And therefore, at least in Tabnine, we have taken the stance that we only train on code with permissive open source licenses. And it is not a legal question for us, but rather, again, respecting the intent in which the code has been contributed to the community.
Yeah.
But your question was also about the trustworthiness. And I think you can apply the same question to code generated by humans in some sense, or code copied from the web, and
Stack
uh,
Overflow.
yeah, from Stack Overflow. And I think the same kind of rule applies. The responsibility at the end is on the developer who is consuming the code, right, and inserting the code into her project, and that's her responsibility ultimately. And this is why this profession is not going away. Had we needed no human, then yes, you just generate everything. Everything would be trustworthy, and we're done. I think there's definitely some human in the loop required to make sure not only that the code is not malicious, but to make sure that the code does what you intended for it to do, which is not always fully specified in the description or in the context in which the code is generated. So yeah, definitely a place for human there, making sure that what you consume is trustworthy, and more importantly, doing what you wanted it to actually do.
I completely agree. I think trustworthiness is not specific to AI. We should also apply that to human written, developer written code. So
Yeah,
very interesting.
it's also, it's the same with self-driving car. I think, like, I'm not an expert on self-driving cars, but, I think it's probably doing pretty well, but it is being held to a higher standard than the one that humans are held to, right? And we have to be realistic in our kind of expectations if we want to this technology to be adopted. And hopefully, self-driving code, or kind of auto-programmed code, auto-generated code for most application is not as critical as a self-driving car, right? And I think the adoption will also be, hopefully, or already is, much faster.
Absolutely, completely agree on that. So, Eran, there are quite a few tools in the market. For example, GitHub Copilot, Amazon Code Whisperer, Replit. Then ServiceNow has also launched a code completion tool. So there are quite a few. So, what is the differentiating factor for Tabnine? How is it different?
So I think, first of all, in kind of right now, Tabnine, I think is very different in the sense that it puts you, the developer, in control. You can run Tabnine wherever you want. You can run it on our SaaS. You can run it in your VPC, or even on premise in a completely isolated environment. So we are basically catering to your isolation or security needs. Tabnine also guarantees that we never train on your code for training the universal models, or we don't learn from you for the sake of serving others. Tabnine, as I mentioned earlier, has only been trained on code with permissive open source licenses. So the question does Tabnine generate GPL code? It cannot. It has never seen GPL code in its training set, and we provide full provenance of the training set, so we can give you a list of the repos. It's completely transparent. You can see exactly all the code that we have trained on and the licenses that we have trained on. And if you're a large enterprise and you say, hey, Tabnine, I actually want a new model that has never seen code from such and such, we can even do that, right? Like give you a pre-trained model that has excluded some of the training data, at least for certain facets of the product. Finally, Tabnine can be customized to your code base. So we can fine-tune Tabnine to your code base such that it knows your patterns and your best practices, which I think is very important for an enterprise. We have a few enterprise customers which live in their own world, so to speak. So they have huge amounts of code that is internal, using internal libraries, using kind of their own patterns, their own best practices, which are not what you learn in the Tabnine universal model from open source. So actually deploying purely the open source model in these enterprises is not going to serve them well. And for those enterprises, we have created and are creating for other customers specialized models that are tailored to their code base. As I mentioned earlier, this is actually a wider conversation than this because it's not a single specialized model for an org, because a large enough enterprise typically has also different parts of the enterprise who do things completely differently, right? And so there's some richness to that problem as well.
Got it. I think it's an excellent explanation in terms of how Tabnine is different. So basically, what you're saying is customers can either consume the SaaS way of integrating with the model, or they can run it in their VPC, which is almost like a hybrid mechanism, or even on-prem to fine-tune models on their existing code base. So that actually brings me to a question. There are a lot of enterprises that are running legacy code, maybe old Java code or even COBOL. So can we fine tune and use the technique of neural machine translation for app modernization, like converting 2-decade old Java code to something like Rust or Ruby or Python? Do you think that's a supported use case?
I think a lot of people ask about that, and I think the problem is not that hard if you literally want to do one-to-one translation. The problem is as you're doing this modernization, the project rarely says, the project description is rarely take this COBOL code base and replicate it one-to-one to Java. You also want to benefit from this kind of migration, maybe modernize a little bit the architecture, maybe do something else. And this is where things get complicated. Also, I think another problem is the guaranteeing that what you get at the end has the same behavior, so to speak. So I think it's not the translation project that is the problem, but it is the validation project that is the problem. And also, when it's not the same, what are you willing to tolerate? And maybe the new behavior is actually the desired one. And I've been part of such projects in the past. I think the majority of the questions are around the specification and the intent, because the original code has bugs as well, right? When you come to translate this COBOL code, you found out that actually not doing the right thing. And then you get into the discussion of what should be the spec and what should be the migration. But the use case for these models, I think is a valid use case. There's a bunch of background knowledge required on kind of the libraries, especially the use of internal libraries. These projects are huge. They're built on like legacy libraries which have specific behaviors, and I think a lot is in the migration of the libraries themselves.
Got it. Yeah, this is definitely not language translation where you just look at the word embeddings and the semantic meaning, but it goes way beyond that. I completely agree.
Yeah, it's also not about the programming language per se, right? Because like translating Python syntax or whatever COBOL syntax to Java syntax is quite easy, but the API calls, the library calls, and what is the semantics of kind of error handling. What happens if the salary is null, right? And what happens internally in COBOL may be quite different than what Java is doing in the libraries. And so these things are quite subtle. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So, personally, Eran, I think the future of a code, AI based code assistance is the conversational chatbot. The first step is code completion. The second one is obviously the chatbot. I got early access to GitHub Copilot X, and I could see how I could handle the entire life cycle. I write the code using code completion. Then I go to the chat window, right click and turn that into a Docker image, deploy it to Kubernetes without writing a single line of code and config. And I have also
Yeah.
seen Tabnine's recent announcement about the chatbot that's coming soon.
Mhm.
So, uh, what do you think is the combination of this code completion plus chatbot enables developers with? What is the ultimate goal?
Yeah. So I think chat is great. Copilot X is great. Tabnine chat is great. There are steps in the right direction. But I doubt that what you want to do as a developer is kind of chat with the chatbot all day. I think at least our vision and the way that we're working on things is chat is kind of the uh, lowest common denominator because it can do everything, but it kind of puts the burden of consuming the results on you. So you have to maybe copy paste things, you have to put them in the right place. What you really want is to combine uh, Tabnine into your processes such that it integrates seamlessly and just fast forwards you. So code completion is a good example because you didn't have to do anything special, right? You get code completions and you just, hit tab. And it's like in your process, it accelerates you. You don't need like, imagine that code completion would happen in a side window that you have to copy paste the completion every time into the place that you're working. That would be, not as valuable or actually quite annoying, right? And so this is the chat analogy right now is there. So a lot of burden on the developer, even when the raw thing is created. And what I call the fundamental theorem of Gen AI is that the cost of describing what you want plus the cost of taking the result, consuming the result, has to be much, much smaller than the cost of doing the whole task manually. Right? So this is a fundamental kind of human effort theorem that just says, if it takes me 5 minutes to explain to the chat what I want, and then takes me 5 minutes to kind of take the results and put them in the right places, where it would have taken me 1 minute to just do it myself, I'm never going to use the chat, right? And what you really want is to accelerate both parts. You want to make sure that the developer doesn't have to work hard to describe what is necessary in this particular context. So you want the AI, you want Tabnine to be fully contextually aware, right? To have full contextual awareness. If I'm here, if I'm in the debugger and I'm in this line, kind of the next thing that I'm going to do is show the value of variable X. I already know kind of you want the AI to predict and not want to say, hey, go to the chat, say, I'm debugging this file and I'm in line 342 and I want to know. So this is not how it should work, right? It should work completely seamlessly in your workflow for every task. And I think the real value comes also from moving one step above and not talking just about tasks that happen in the IDE as an individual, but also for the code review, and also having contextual awareness that goes beyond the code that is in the IDE. Maybe I'm trying to do something, but there's a full Confluence document that explains why we should never do anything like it, right? And so when I ask the question, maybe in the chat, or maybe I'm trying to do something in the idea, I want something to pop up and say like, hey, Ron, actually Johnny explained like just last week why this is the wrong way to do the whole thing, and maybe look there at that discussion and it will tell you like the right way or the right thing that we're trying to achieve. So I think much better integration into actual workflows and processes, and integration, contextual awareness, that is organizational and beyond the IDE is where kind of the exponential value is going to be generated, because these are things that right now as a developer you have to go look for them, right? And there's tremendous value in them coming to you
Right.
in your process naturally and making you kind of as aware as you could be to kind of the common knowledge in the organization around the task that you're trying to do. And this is a very hard challenge to generate this level of contextual awareness. But this is what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. I think the conversational chatbot is great for code explanation. I can select the entire code block and say, hey, explain me this code. And then it can basically explain the functionality and even improvise the code. So I'm actually looking forward to Tabnine's chatbot, which is going to be available soon. So Eran, the last question, which I typically ask all the Gen AI experts in my show is, the current landscape of generative AI reminds us so much of Android versus iPhone or Windows versus Linux with the open source versus proprietary debates. I'm just curious, what's your view on this whole open source versus proprietary model debate, and how will this pan out?
Yeah, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future, But I think with great AI comes great power and great responsibility. And at least
Absolutely.
I don't want this power to be centralized only in the hands of a few giants. So I'm very supportive and very optimistic about the abilities and kind of the proliferation of open source models. Uh, we're seeing more and more of those that are very powerful. I think this will continue. At this, the architectures are pretty much known. Kind of the differentiating factor now is mostly the data and the quality of data, the amount and quality of data that you can train on. And I'm hopeful that the community will be able to keep up the good pace and of innovation and contributions and keep generating these high value open source models that the community is benefiting from. So very supportive of these efforts around open source models.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much. That brings us to the end of this discussion. Thanks again for joining my show and clarifying a lot of concepts and explaining the evolution of AI based code assistance. Thank you so much.